My name is Everly Morgan, 38 years old. For nearly 2 decades, I haven't appeared in a single family photo, haven't been mentioned in any news reports, and haven't existed in any public military record. They said I gave up. They said I wasn't strong enough to be a soldier. They called me a deserter. Until that morning, during a large-scale training exercise in California, an unmarked helicopter landed in the middle of hundreds of officers. I stepped out in dark civilian clothes, no rank, no insignia, nothing that would let anyone recognize who I was. No one paid attention. No one reacted, until the brigade commander suddenly stood at attention, raised his hand in salute, and shouted, "Attention! General Morgan on deck." The entire field went dead silent. And among the ranks, my younger brother, Lieutenant Dylan Morgan, dropped his weapon. Have you ever been labeled a failure by your own family and the world, only for them to be forced to bow their heads before the real you? Have you ever had to live in the shadows just to protect the right thing that no one ever saw? If you've ever been looked down on just because you chose a different path, leave a comment below. Hit like if you've ever been misunderstood. Subscribe so I'll have the strength to tell the rest of this story, because this isn't even the most shocking part. What happened after that salute is the reason I had to speak out. I've never forgotten that night, the night my whole family raised their glasses to celebrate Dylan, my younger brother, for graduating with honors from the Officer Academy. The party was held at my parents' suburban estate in Sacramento, the same place that used to display a photo of me in my ROC uniform at 20 years old, then quietly took it down, like it had never been there. The cake was big, covered in white frosting and dark red lettering. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Dylan Morgan, the pride of the family." Below that, everyone took turns sharing his accomplishments. Strong in strategy, well-liked by his commanders, born to lead. They were all beaming. Everyone was thrilled. And I just sat at the corner of the table, hands wrapped around a glass of water, listening as each word pierced through the worn-down skin I'd grown used to wearing. My Uncle Robert, a former Marine, lifted his glass and turned to me. "Everly, you must be proud seeing your little brother go farther than you ever did, huh? Look at him. Nothing like when you dropped out years ago." I gave a small smile, said nothing. My mother sat at the head of the table, cutting slices of cake. When it was my turn, she simply placed the plate down without looking at me, then continued chatting with the guest next to her. I clearly heard her say, "Dylan was truly born to wear the uniform, unlike someone else. Unlike someone else." That sentence didn't need emphasis. It had been a suspended sentence hanging over my head for more than 10 years. They had no idea. None of them knew where I had gone or what I had experienced since I left ROC without warning. In their eyes, I was the one who dropped out because I was too weak, couldn't handle the pressure, didn't have the courage. They thought I failed. They didn't know that the night I left the dorm with a small backpack and an incomplete uniform was the same night a convoy of black vehicles took me straight to an isolated base in Utah. There was no invitation. Just a folder marked "Top Secret" placed in front of me and a simple question. "We need someone who knows how to stay silent. Can you handle not existing on paper?" I signed. From that moment, I vanished from all public systems. No one knew where I was. My family assumed I had dropped out, ran from the military. In reality, I was one of the first 6 people selected for trial operations under the Shadow Protocol, a Department of Defense initiative focused on unconventional warfare, strategic intelligence, and high-scale cyber operations. We didn't have real names in the system. No displayed rank, no identifiable uniform. We worked in the shadows, under the identities of people who didn't exist. I lived through 5 winters in the Anchorage command room, 2 border-side operations in Syria, and nearly a decade under a fabricated digital persona. Every mission came with a rule. Absolutely no disclosure, not even to family. The price was to be forever seen as the one who gave up. I wasn't bitter about that. But that night in Sacramento, seeing Dylan glowing in his dress uniform, holding the ceremonial officer's sword, and my mother looking at him with that unmistakable pride, I realized that no matter how many real front lines I had crossed, I would always be left out of the family portrait simply because I didn't fit the frame they built. Dylan didn't look at me once during the party. Maybe he thought I was just an old disappointment, or maybe he didn't want to ruin his moment of glory. But when everyone was gathering for group photos, and I stood up to step aside, a stranger, a man I'd never seen before, walked toward me. He was in plain clothes, rugged face, solid posture. A veteran, I guessed. He spoke softly, but just loud enough for me to hear. "Phantom Veil? You still monitoring?" I looked straight into his eyes. Never took my eyes off it. He nodded, slipped a small piece of paper into my hand, and walked away as if he'd never been there. I didn't open it right away. I just held it tight, letting the familiar feeling seep through my fingers. Inside was a set of coordinates. Fort Avalon, 6 o'clock in the morning, limited access, priority 3. I understood. Something was happening, and they needed me. And of course, I would go. After the party, I walked out to the lot and sat in the old SUV I'd kept since I was 30. Before starting the engine, I looked into the rearview mirror. The reflection was of a woman with graying hair, eyes no longer fiery like they once were, but deeper, sharper. I wondered if Dylan ever wanted to know the real reason I left ROC. Had he ever wondered, even once, where his sister went, the one who taught him how to shoot? How to tie his laces the military way? Maybe not. Just like the rest of the family. They only wanted me to match their version of success. When I chose a path without spotlights, they decided I had lost my way. But light isn't always what guides us best. For many years, I didn't need their recognition. I just needed to do my job. But there's a truth I had to face that night. Even the strongest hearts can develop hairline fractures from a lifetime of being misunderstood, especially when it comes from your own blood. I looked at the paper in my hand one more time, then tucked it into my jacket. The night breeze stirred the trees behind me, carrying the scent of lavender from the backyard. My mother's favorite. And the same scent that visited me in old dreams where I was the child never welcomed back, but I wasn't returning to be accepted. I was returning because something bigger needed me. And maybe, just maybe, to let them see that the woman they once called a quitter was carrying a whole war they never even imagined. I arrived at Fort Avalon while it was still dark. The Highland chill slipped across my neck like a quiet but sharp reminder. There are no warm welcomes here, no flags waving, no one waiting at the gate. Just a red dot blinking in my retinal scan as I passed the biometric checkpoint. The door opened. No greeting, no words needed. 4 levels underground, the blue light of the monitoring system washed across my face. I took off my coat and stepped into the central command room, where every signal path, threat recognition protocol, and data trace converged like the neural web of a vast electronic brain. I once called it Phantom Veil, America's first strategic self-defense network, not reliant on human input, but built around a machine learning structure, capable of predicting and responding to threats before they happened. 7 years ago, when the first prototype went live, I was still a lieutenant colonel with limited access. But 3 weeks later, when the system self-isolated, a strange code packet coming from a NATO logistics station in Poland issued a warning 32 minutes before a massive data breach attempt, and neutralized it with 0 damage. They understood I had created something they couldn't ignore. 4 months later, I was granted the rank of Major General, not because of the number of troops I commanded, not because of battlefield achievements, but because I was the only person who understood Phantom Veil from the inside out, and the only one who knew how to keep it in the dark. There was no promotion ceremony, no news bulletin. My name was erased from every public record. In the system, I was simply M7R, a designation for a special grade officer, untraceable, faceless, nameless. I lived through many seasons without holidays. I was stationed at bases with no national flags. I endured winters at -40 degrees in Barentsburg, overseeing signal pathways between the U.S. satellite grid and an old Cold War intelligence post the Russians had left behind. I once sat in a basement in Mosul, watching a high-level cyber breach unfold that could have triggered a new war only to shut it down with a single line of code. No gunfire, no blood spilled. But I knew that with every second I survived, I took another step deeper into the shadows. Inside the quiet room at Fort Avalon, I silently placed my hand on the main control panel. The Phantom Veil interface appeared not flashy, not user-friendly, just lines of code and data streams flowing like the heartbeat of a living organism. A voice spoke behind me. "General." I turned. It was Linda Walsh. Same sharp eyes, steady voice, hair loosely tied behind her neck. I had once trained her in the Reflex Reserve Group, a temporary encryption support unit, but Linda had quickly surpassed technical limitations and became one of the few people I trusted enough to hand over a Phantom Veil secondary key. "Chain, have you checked the latest cycle?" I asked. Linda nodded. "A faint pulse showed up in the proxy system 28 hours ago, but it vanished before we could trace it." I frowned. "Details?" "The data was embedded in a simulated training signal, a type of internal test package, assigned a valid code, but routed abnormally." "Who sent it?" Linda paused before replying. "Second Lieutenant Dylan Morgan." My chest tightened. I kept my expression neutral. "Does he have access?" "Training level only. But the device used was tagged with your original system ID." Linda looked straight at me. "Did you ever give him a backup unit?" I didn't answer immediately. I flashed back to an afternoon last year when I visited Dylan's base. I had given him a box containing a personal hard drive, said it held old military files for study. I thought it was harmless. But now, I wasn't sure what I had actually stored inside. Linda didn't need confirmation. She understood. I turned back to the console, typed a command. A hidden data stream surfaced evidence of a system access trigger from a locked auxiliary route decommissioned in 2017, back when I managed Tier 3 security protocols for the expansion project. No one knew that path existed. "No one except me," I whispered. "Does anyone else know?" Linda shook her head. "Not yet, but the signal is beginning to activate Level 2 alert parameters. If we wait too long, the system-wide lockdown will trigger automatically. You'll be flagged for investigation, as an internal threat." I finished the sentence for her. Linda nodded, slow and heavy. "And this time, they won't give you a second chance." I stared at the strings of code scrolling down the screen like I was looking at my 20-year-old self, young, naive, full of ideals. I never wanted anyone to know what I really did. But now, that silence was putting everything I protected in danger. I placed my hand on the biometric scanner. "I need provisional investigative access." Linda hesitated. "If I authorize it, I'll be recorded as a collaborator. We both know this wasn't an accident." I looked her in the eye. "Someone is trying to open a door I locked 10 years ago. And if we don't shut it now, they won't just destroy my career. This country could pay the price." Linda said nothing more. She quietly swiped her badge, granted access. The status light turned green. I exhaled, sharp and deep. Darkness isn't always the enemy, but when it's exploited for the wrong purpose, it devours everything. And I won't let that happen. Not now. Not after I spent my whole life keeping it intact. I sat in the lowest level command room at Fort Avalon, where the temperature was stabilized at 66 degrees to protect the equipment, but the chill from the server walls still pierced my hands like needles. Every sound in this room was swallowed by soundproofing, even our uneasy breaths. On the main screen was Phantom Veil's interface, but not in normal mode. A flashing red alert strip warned of unauthorized access to the strategic core, the zone housing predictive models of cross-border attack scenarios, automated response chains, and national defense trigger protocols. A foreign data stream had touched it. Not deep, not enough to extract anything, but enough to activate a Level 5 alert, the highest, equivalent to cyber war readiness. What sent a chill down my spine wasn't the access itself. It was the code signature embedded in it, part of a digital fingerprint I had written in 2009 during the initial Phantom Veil trials at Gray Ridge Base, Alaska. I had never shared it. I had never made a copy. That code, according to protocol, should have been purged 8 years ago when I was reappointed as the anonymous commander of the strategic cluster. Linda stood behind me, her voice lowered. That signature, it's yours? I nodded slightly, eyes locked on the screen. Original version. I wrote the simulation module by hand. Could it be spoofed? I don't think so. This isn't a standard authorization code. It's an indirect trigger. It only exists on one specific device. I paused, then said slowly, "The drive I gave to Dylan." Linda stayed silent. The screen's glow lit her face, highlighting a faint crease near her eye, a sign of worry she tried to mask with professionalism. I continued unlocking the security layers. The data response came slowly, like blood seeping through fabric. Finally, I pulled the origin. A simulation training terminal in the technical zone of Fort Avalon, an area designated for newly commissioned officers. Dylan. I leaned back in the chair, bitter and breathless. I didn't want to believe it. But data doesn't lie. I requested the surveillance feed from the last 3 days in the training sector. A video clip played, Dylan entering the simulation room with a military-issued laptop. He glanced around, saw no one, then plugged a storage device into the auxiliary port. No hesitation, no clumsiness, clear intent. I watched my brother's face on the screen, his brow furrowed like he was calculating, not like someone making a mistake. The feeling sank from my chest into my stomach, like someone was dragging my past into the light with the very hands of my own blood. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, letting the lines of command continue to scroll. Linda was the first to break the silence. "What are you planning to do?" I tightened my grip on the edge of the chair. "I need to see him. Everly. If your superiors find out this involves immediate family, you'll be removed from the investigation. I'm not asking for investigative authority." I turned and looked her straight in the eyes. "I'm asking for the right to face him." Linda nodded. Nothing more needed to be said. 30 minutes later, I stood outside the dorm room for newly commissioned officers. Dylan didn't know I was there. He didn't know who had requested his room to be unlocked. And when I stepped in, he was sitting on his bed, headphones on, eyes locked on his laptop screen. I didn't knock. I just stood there. He looked up and froze for a second when he realized it was me. His expression changed surprise, then caution. "You?" I nodded and slowly shut the door behind me. "We need to talk." Dylan pulled out his earbuds, stood up, leaning slightly forward like he was ready for a confrontation. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away. I looked around the room, simple, tidy, still smelling like printer ink and fresh plastic from new equipment. Then my eyes stopped on the silver hard drive on his desk, the one I had given Dylan a year ago, saying it contained old simulation strategies for study. "You used it?" I asked, pointing at the drive. Dylan followed my gaze, then fell silent for a moment. "You left it for me. But you know better than anyone that device wasn't standard issue for training. I just wanted to understand why you left ROC." His voice dropped slightly, strained. "The whole family always thought you quit. I used to think that too. But then, during the exercise when the entire unit stood at attention for a woman not even in uniform, I knew I'd been wrong." I looked him straight in the eyes. "And you thought hacking into a strategic defense program was the way to find out?" Dylan didn't argue. He just exhaled. "You've been gone from our lives for almost 20 years. No letters, no news, no one even knew you were alive. I just wanted to know who you really are." I stepped closer, my voice firm, not loud. "I'm someone who spent 18 years in the dark, Dylan. Not because I ran away, but because I was protecting something you almost accidentally woke up." Dylan looked up. He didn't try to justify himself. "You could report me." "I could. Will you be okay?" I looked at him for a long moment. "That's not the right question." "Then what is?" "The question is what you triggered. Did it wake up anyone else?" Dylan's eyes flickered with a kind of fear he had never felt before. And in that instant, I knew he understood that a seemingly harmless action had changed everything. This wasn't personal anymore. This wasn't about a sister they used to overlook. This was national, and someone out there had been waiting for this moment. I walked out of Dylan's room just as the clock in the medical wing hallway struck 10 p.m. The corridor lights cast long, cold strips across the floor, like time passing silently while no one noticed. No one stopped me. No officer held my gaze for more than 2 seconds. I wore civilian clothes, no rank, no badge. To the young soldiers in the barracks, I was just some older woman who had wandered into the wrong area. But I knew exactly where I was, and more importantly, I knew who was trying to pull me out of it. I returned to the temporary command room at Fort Avalon, where Linda was waiting. She had already done her part extracting the full access logs from Dylan's personal computer and uploading them into an isolated analysis system, away from any network that could be monitored. "There's a strange code string inside the storage drive," Linda said, eyes locked on the main screen. "But what really caught my attention is the attached document. It doesn't just contain tactical-level identification keys, it includes a strategic deployment map for Phantom Veil's pre-development phase." I stopped in the middle of the room. "What document?" Linda enlarged the scan on the screen. It took me a second to recognize it. A text file once marked classified no duplicates that I had personally written, revised, and sealed in 2014, back when Phantom Veil was still a fragmented prototype without a defined shape. The original had been destroyed in a high-heat incineration system at the Utah base right after a top-level closed-door briefing. I had never shared a copy with anyone. "Has anyone accessed it besides Dylan?" I asked. Linda shook her head. "That file was hidden inside an encrypted folder. Couldn't be opened without the exact original decryption string." I took a deep breath. My chest felt tight, not out of doubt toward Dylan, but from the sense that something was being constructed too precisely, too timely. "I did send that document to one person," I said slowly, "more than 10 years ago. At the time, I needed internal feedback but didn't have clearance to bring it to the main group. He was a senior technical advisor on Phantom Veil's early-stage development team." Linda turned toward me. "Name?" "Tobias Grant." That name brought a chill into the room. Tobias was a ghost in military memory, a former lead programmer for the Pentagon's Core Security Division, who vanished from the system after an abruptly terminated mission in Eastern Europe. The official record claimed Tobias died in a field equipment accident, but those of us who worked deep in the core, like me and Linda, knew that accident was never verified. And Tobias was the only person besides me who ever held the original code. Linda stepped back half a step, her voice rough. "You think he's still alive?" I didn't answer right away. I just remembered the look in Tobias's eyes the last time we met after a heated argument about whether to integrate autonomous response logic into Phantom Veil. He wanted the system to have the authority to assess and act without human confirmation. I refused. I told him no machine, no matter how smart, should ever be allowed to wage war without a human standing in between. He said nothing, then disappeared from the military map 3 months later. "The file was found on Dylan's device," I said, "but it was embedded using a sequence I've only ever seen Tobias use, a form of double encryption, reversed, with timestamp layering. No one uses that style anymore." Linda clenched her fist. "Do we have evidence of the access point?" I nodded. "If he's alive and he's using Dylan as a gateway into the system, we need to know why. And why now?" Linda turned toward the auxiliary console, scanning for off-base activity logs. "A secondary signal was sent from a network point in Fort Avalon's technical sector about 42 hours ago. The receiving station isn't part of the first military grid. It's registered to a private defense tech firm, Black Sail Systems." A chill crept down my spine. Black Sail had come up in a security report 3 years ago, linked to a data breach in the Middle East, and Tobias had public ties to them before he disappeared. I whispered, more to myself than to her, "He's back." Linda looked at me. "If he's alive, he won't be acting alone. And Dylan, if it wasn't intentional, then he's the first link in the chain." I sat down slowly, resting my hand on the command console. I'm going to find Tobias myself. Linda froze. Alone? This is between me and him. I need to know why he's using my own shadow to return. Everly, I cut her off. If he's really the one behind the breach, then his target isn't the code, it's identity. He's building a cover, a ghost, and he's using the name I left behind to hide inside. Linda didn't argue. We both understood. No one knew what Tobias. It looked like now. No one knew where he was. But I knew this. He was the only one smart enough to reuse the original code, ruthless enough to manipulate my brother, and cold enough to awaken a war machine buried in erased memory. I looked up at the dark glass in front of me, my reflection staring back. After all those years hiding in silence, I was being dragged into the light not because I wanted to, but because someone I once knew wanted to wear my name like a shield. And if I didn't act first, he'd take over even the shadows I once lived in to protect this fragile piece. Linda followed me down to the third level of the data center, where all off-grid signals and original logs were stored separately from the main military network. No automated codes, no fingerprint doors. Just a long, narrow corridor unlocked by an old mechanical key and an encrypted access card, one of only 3 still in existence. I'd kept mine in my coat pocket since 2011. I said nothing as I pushed the heavy door open. Linda walked close beside me, her voice low. If that really is Tobias's code, then he's not just back, he's sending a message. I walked straight to the old encryption terminal at the end of the hallway. The cold machine still ran on a private power line, linked directly to legacy servers from the pre-Phantom project. No one used them anymore, but I had once told the engineers to keep them intact in case something thought dead ever learned to breathe again. I entered the sequence, pulled from Dylan's laptop. The screen powered on silently, blinking with a faint light. A stream of data appeared, time-stamped 36 hours ago. Sender, S4297, a routing station used by civilian contractors along Virginia's southern coastline. Receiver, an unidentified protocol, double encrypted using an old cipher, the kind Tobias once designed for non-existent missions like Arctic Dawn. The back of my neck began to heat up. I want to pull up. Contract records, I said, eyes fixed on the screen. Check the name of the civilian contractor assigned to Station S. 4,297 over the past 2 months. Linda nodded, opened her tablet, fingers moving fast. A minute later, her expression darkened. There's one name, she said slowly. Tyler Grange, fully verified profile, entered the system 3 months ago, has a doctorate in cybersecurity from Stanford. Clean background. No digital records before 2017? I asked. None officially recognized before that year. I closed my eyes for a beat. Tyler Grange. New name, new credentials, new papers. But the construction was too perfect, which was exactly the sign. Tobias, I whispered. You really came back. Linda stepped closer, her voice lower still. You're sure he's the one who sent the data to Dylan? I'm not sure he sent it, I replied. But he's the one who knew Dylan would open it. Linda hesitated. What happened at Arctic Dawn? Everly? I've heard rumors, but no one really knows why Tobias vanished. I leaned slightly against the control panel. The overhead lights reflected white across the silver-gray surface. Everything felt still, like time itself had frozen in this room. Tobias was the best I ever worked with, I began. Sharp, fast, idealistic. But he was also the only one who didn't know when to stop. I remembered clearly those early days at the Arctic front, where our team lived surrounded by freezing winds, just a faint dotted line away from the Russian border on the map. Tobias was in charge of command protocols and reactive strategy in Phantom's first prototype. The problem was, he couldn't tell the difference between simulation and real people. He wanted to test an autonomous reaction model, I said. A kind of self-defense system completely removed from human control. I refused. Linda went silent. Then what happened? I looked at her. My voice dropped lower. There was an incident. Data from the auxiliary station got corrupted. Phantom responded incorrectly. The system almost launched a counter-strike signal right at the foreign border. I had to shut it down manually, and I ordered Tobias's access revoked. Linda stared. You cut him off? I had to. Otherwise, that model would have killed someone. He survived? I stayed quiet, then nodded. But I reported him missing. The system marked him as Kia because no one could reach him after the incident. It was the only way to sever all ties. To restructure Phantom safely. Linda exhaled. And now he's back. Not just back, I said. He's bringing every reason for revenge. And he knows how to disappear better than I ever did. We stood in the silent room, listening to the low hum of the machinery. Each signal pulse moved slowly, like the heartbeat of someone about to faint. I felt time collapsing like 10 years had passed in a single blink, and Tobias was still standing right beside me, at that control station, smiling and saying, the system would be stronger if we eliminated emotion. Linda broke my thoughts with a new alert. There's a response code, she said. From Grange's address. It just came in. I stepped forward. The message appeared on screen. I was right. You never destroyed it. And now it's waking up. I read each word slowly. No sender name. No clear address. But I didn't need to guess. Tobias wasn't just looking for revenge. He was trying to awaken the ghosts we once tried to bury. And if Phantom Veil, or whatever was still alive in its core, really started reacting to the old sequence, then none of us would be able to maintain control. I looked at Linda. We need to trace this backward. He didn't just send a message. He's probing to see who still remembers the past. Linda bit her lip. And what if he doesn't just want access, but wants to revive the reaction framework you once shut down? I stared at the screen, watching lines of code drift by like they were rewriting themselves. Then I'll have to do what I did 10 years ago, I said, my voice low and cold. I'll have to erase everything, even what I once gave my life to build. I was escorted out of the command center in absolute silence. No one said a word. No pity in their eyes. No probing questions. Just the heavy footsteps of 2 security officers beside me, black uniforms, holstered weapons with tethered locks, and blank eyes like they were programmed only to escort, not to understand. At the main-level lobby, my ID badge was stripped from my chest. A clean, quick motion. They pulled it off the lanyard just as the elevator doors closed. In that moment, a single thought struck me. The most painful part wasn't being suspected. It was being cut off from the very system I had once helped build, without a single voice raised to defend me. The holding room. It wasn't part of the official detention block. It was a repurposed meeting room, no mechanical lock, but fitted with remote scanning and biometric tracking. I sat alone on a freezing metal chair, staring at a pane of frosted glass that didn't reflect my face. I knew this was their way of making it look clean, no handcuffs, no jail cell, no public shaming. But the truth remained. I was under suspicion as an internal threat, as the one who opened the gates to Tobias Grant, as the saboteur of Phantom Veil, as a traitor. The documents they found, a voice recording of me authorizing access, a string of emails with root encryption leading to Tyler Grange's civilian station, and a sub-clearance code issued to the device Dylan had used. They all looked complete, legitimate, airtight, and fake. I had never sent those emails, never approved those commands. But every word, every number, every voice match aligned perfectly with my personal records. Someone hadn't just stolen my technical identity. They had reconstructed me a copy, a shadow inside the very system I once believed was impenetrable. At that moment, my fingers went numb from the cold, not from fear, but from a deep, quiet shock. Tobias hadn't just come back. He had planned this step by step, and he wanted me out of the game before I could even touch a single piece. I closed my eyes briefly, refusing to slip into anger. It would serve no purpose. In here, I had no right to argue. No access card, no command seat, no standing to question anything. But I still had one thing. Back in 2013, after an internal security audit, I had embedded an emergency access path into Phantom's system, not through the main interface, and completely untraceable. It was a backdoor, encoded with a custom algorithm I wrote during a stormy night at Candler Base in Alaska. No one had ever found it. Not because they weren't skilled, but because it was hidden in an unmarked sector, under a file name, Echo Run. I opened my eyes, took a slow breath, and touched the inner strap of my old watch. Beneath the worn leather was a hair-thin chip, a shortwave transmitter programmed to activate Echo Run if I lost all access. I tilted my wrist slightly, rotating it into place. A small pulse buzzed in my palm just once, enough to confirm it had connected. From that moment on, I had exactly 15 minutes before the system would detect the response. And in those 15 minutes, I had to reach one person. I tapped 3 times on the metal tabletop, a code pattern from long ago, a signal used between me and someone who had once been my student, later my subordinate, now an independent analyst working outside Fort Avalon. Major Linda Walsh. I didn't call. I didn't message. I sent the signal through Echo's interface, using Linda's old internal ID from when she was still a junior analyst in my training group. The signal was disguised as a training packet, routed through the backup comms line most junior officers had long forgotten. 5 minutes later, across the one-way glass, an image flickered just a flash, like a distortion of light. But I recognized it. Linda had seen the signal. 10 minutes left. I sat perfectly still. No extra movement, no expression. Just waiting. When the door opened, I didn't turn, but I knew those footsteps. The sound of soft leather soles, cautious but steady. And then, a voice behind me, just low enough to avoid the recorders. "I've got 5 minutes. Don't waste them." I turned around. Linda had made it in. She handed me a thin data slate, shaped like any standard tech document, but inside was a full capture of the original system logs from the past 48 hours. What I needed wasn't the data, it was the original signatures. I ran my hand along the screen, pausing at the line marked Everly Morgan Authorized Override. And, in the top right corner, a subroutine string. "Do you see it?" I asked, eyes still locked on the screen. Linda nodded. "This voice signature code, it didn't originate from the internal system." "I know. It came from a simulator, military grade, but off the main grid." "Is there a location?" I flipped the slate over. Linda had already marked a faint IP address. It flashed for only 4 milliseconds, then vanished. I calculated silently. That address was outside Fort Avalon's perimeter. "Black Sail," I whispered. "It's running in the background from one of their auxiliary stations." Linda looked at me, her face tightening. "If you're right, then we're not just seeing a breach. We're looking at a full-scale identity forgery campaign, nuclear grade." I nodded. Tobias hadn't just painted me as a traitor. He was using me as a shield, a trap to go deeper, into the system, into the trust I had spent a lifetime building. And now I understood, clearer than ever. If I wanted to protect the truth, I had to tear down the cloth, a shadow he was using to impersonate me. Whatever it took. Linda and I didn't exit the holding room through the main hallway. The route she chose led down to a secondary maintenance level, an area most military personnel no longer visited, once used as Phantom's early experimental equipment storage. Ever since the system had been restructured and moved to the new data center, this wing had been abandoned. The hallway lights flickered, the floor was layered with dust, and our footsteps echoed like voices from a past no one wanted to remember. We stopped in front of an unmarked metal door, no electronic lock, just an old mechanical keyhole and a worn nameplate with chipped paint. Linda pulled a short key from her jacket pocket, inserted it, and turned it with deliberate force. The door creaked open, the air filled with the faint scent of rust and burnt plastic. "Is it still functional?" I asked as we stepped inside. "Partially," Linda replied. "I've kept a small, auxiliary Team 3 independent techs who left the system after Phantom's second phase. They're not on Fort Avalon's records." 3 figures stood inside the dimly lit room. All of them turned when they saw me. No greetings, no questions. But I caught the look they exchanged. It wasn't the look of people searching for a leader. It was the look of those who'd once seen something buried deep, now rising back to the surface. I nodded. Let's begin. The first was Owen, a low-level system analyst who once specialized in decoding recursive feedback signals back when Phantom was still shapeless. He placed a small device on the table, a compact cube no larger than 2 palms, pulsing with slow blue light. We just finished backtracing the full chain of the forged codes, Owen said. Most of them originated from a domestic IP civilian station in Virginia, but one branch slipped through before the signal decayed. That signal didn't return to any U.S. base data region. Where did it go? I asked. Owen tapped a few commands. A map of underground cables and satellite relays appeared on the screen. Greenland, he said. Specifically, an old NATO outpost once used as a temporary military relay during Cold War missions. It's now operated by a private company. I stared at the red marker on the map. A chill ran through me. That station was the same place we had temporarily held during Operation Arctic Dawn. It was also the place Tobias vanished. Linda stepped closer. We ran checks on electronic transactions linked to the station. Over the past 6 months, there were 3 large data transfers sent to the U.S., all registered under Defense Research Assistance. And the point of contact listed was Tyler Grange. Under contract with who? I asked. Horizon Defense Systems, she answered, a subsidiary of Blacksail. But here's the part that matters most. Linda opened a printed folder and placed it on the table. I leaned in. It was a contract for the sale of military-grade simulated reaction algorithm licenses sold as code samples. The seller's name, Tobias Grant. Or, at least, someone using his personal ID string. He didn't just make me the scapegoat, I said slowly. He's using Phantom to traffic data. Not ordinary data, Owen added. We dug deeper. He's selling access to Phantom's core module structure, parts never released to the public system. Segments of code still running in Phantom's background, locked by original keys. I clenched both hands. The core structure, only Tobias and I had ever written it. How much of that code has been sold? I asked, my voice dry. At least 3 full builds, Linda replied. Sent to 3 different countries, none of which are part of the Defense Data Sharing Treaty. That meant he was selling the United States' automated war simulation capability to governments outside the Allied network. And all of it was based on the code I once built. For defense. I exhaled slowly, as if swallowing layers of ash from the past. He knew how to earn their trust, I said. Forged documents, fake access paths, even used my brother as a gateway. Everything he's done points back to me. So that when the system collapses or someone gets caught, the name burned into history will be mine. Linda was silent for a while, then asked, "What do you want to do next?" I looked up, the dim light from the monitor reflecting in my eyes. I want him exposed, publicly, system-wide, and to the very model he's been exploiting. Owen looked up. Do you have a way? I do. I nodded. Phantom Veil is still running in background mode, isn't it? Linda replied. Partially. The reactive core has been restructured, but the auto-adaptive algorithms still respond to emergency signals. I'll input a false signal, I said. Not to crash the system, but to create a high-complexity emergency. Something messy, full of layered noise, enough to force Tobias to react and try to regain control. Owen frowned. What if he doesn't show up? He will, I said firmly. Because the signal I'm about to send will point directly to one model he'd never let anyone touch, the one that only he and I know. Already failed once. Linda stepped in closer. Arctic Dawn? I nodded. We'll recreate the old incident, I said. But this time, I'm the one holding the switch. Inside that suffocating old tech room, the plan began to form. Not the desperate plan of someone on the run, but a counterattack, a final move to flip the board. And if Tobias ever thought I was just a pawn he could control, he misjudged the woman who once wrote the rules for the entire game. I returned to Fort Avalon under cover of thick darkness, not through the main gate, nor through the biometric secured access points I used to walk through every day. I came in through the old sub-basement, once the early-stage simulation lab, now just a dust-covered memory. Linda had cleared the path earlier, powering up a secondary circuit that connected directly to Phantom Veil's auxiliary response core. That part of the system had been considered frozen since the restructuring 5 years ago, but I knew the truth. It hadn't died. It was just waiting for the right signal. We moved through the maintenance corridor that led straight into the central command room. The door was still secured with dual-layer encryption, but Linda carried a temporary decryption key built from the same original code I had written 10 years ago. She entered each string into the decoder, then looked back at me. "You sure? If this fails, the whole system will lock permanently in 7 seconds. I nodded. It won't fail. Because the one who wrote it was me. The door opened like a breath held too long. A faint glow from dozens of control panels bathed the room. Phantom Veil was in suspended mode, but the core system still responded to maintenance pings like a sleeping organism that could still hear. I sat in the center chair, feeling like my hands had never left this keyboard. The feeling of someone who had lost everything now back at the place where she once created the most complex weapon in the modern world. Linda stood behind me, eyes tense as she watched the code unfold. Lines of counter commands I had written in 2012 rose back from sleep, layer by layer, like the spine of an ancient machine. Then came the final segment. I activated the Echo Core command, a contingency protocol buried deep beneath 3 primary system layers, designed to trigger when the system detected repetitive, unauthorized interference. Once initiated, Phantom Veil would begin reconstructing the complete access history. Every data packet, every user action, every overwritten string, surfacing all of it to the main control screen, regardless of who had accessed the system. And as the data surged upward, the silence in the room fractured. A soft chime echoed from the auxiliary consoles. Each screen lit up not with static maps or encryption diagrams, but with the clear visualization of manipulation in progress. I saw the access logs from the civilian station in Virginia. I saw the exact moment the forged command had been triggered. And then, buried deep within a Tier 3 encrypted segment, I saw a compressed audio file. I opened it. Tobias's voice. Clear. Low enough to chill my blood. No need to eliminate her. Just reroute the entire protocol under her name. So when the system crashes, it all traces back to Everly Morgan. She knows too much. And her loyalty, that's a strategic flaw. Linda froze behind me. That audio, it was the one I had once saved on my personal encrypted drive back in 2014. The piece of evidence I'd never released. I remembered it perfectly. I'd hidden it on a USB drive and handed it to Dylan on a rainy afternoon, saying only, "Keep this. When you're old enough to understand, open it." That thought had barely formed when the central door burst open. Dylan walked in. No guards. No announcement. He stood still, the glow from the screens lighting his tense face. Those eyes no longer held the naivety of a graduation day. They carried the weight of someone who'd walked a long road, only to realize the person he once doubted had been lighting his path all along. I rose to my feet. I didn't speak. He didn't look at me. He stepped forward, placing a weathered USB drive on the table, the plastic faded, the silver edge dulled by time. "I heard everything," Dylan said, "and I understand now." I placed my hand over the USB, not asking when he had opened it. All that mattered, if my brother stood here with that look in his eyes, was that he had chosen his side. Linda plugged the USB into the auxiliary port. The data synced instantly. The secondary screen displayed the full audio structure, visuals, and timestamp chain perfectly matching the file I had just pulled from the core system. 2 different recordings, 2 sources, same content. No more denials, no more doubt, everything I had said now backed by proof. Dylan lowered his voice, looking at me. "I'm sorry. For not asking. For thinking you left." I placed a hand on his shoulder. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I turned back to the command screen. The final line of code had just executed. On Phantom Veil's primary interface, I transmitted the only command left: display the full system access history for the past 3 months, and send a mirrored copy to the National Security Council and the Office of the Secretary of Defense. I knew this would trigger a hearing, that it would pull me into the light, but I had no other choice. Tobias had broken the rules, and now I had to use the very machine he once created to unmask him. I looked at Dylan once more. "Thank you for holding on to that." He nodded, eyes red. Linda stepped forward to the secondary screen. "Now it's our turn to drag him into the light," she said. I didn't respond. I looked at the system I had once written with belief and watched it cleanse itself of betrayal. I never thought this day would come, but if it did, I would be the one to trigger it. Without a tremor. Without regret. The atmosphere inside the military courtroom that morning was unlike any hearing I had attended in over 20 years of service in the shadows. There were no reporters, no cameras, no gallery seats. Just a long wooden table covered in gray cloth, 3 generals seated in the center, with the National Security Council representative to the right, and the current commanding officer of the Phantom Veil program to the left. I entered wearing not civilian clothes, but the full formal dress uniform. For the first time, my name was displayed across the silver plaque on the left. Waistband. Everly Morgan. 1 name. 6 letters. A name I had spent nearly 2 decades fighting for the right to exist. Linda sat in the advisory row, beside the independent audit team she had led. Dylan sat behind her, still in his officer uniform, shoulder patch marked with a special insignia for assisting in exposing high-level internal manipulation. His eyes never left me. I was invited to sit. No handcuffs, no escort. "Major General Everly Morgan," the Central General began. His voice was steady, not sharp, not dismissive. "We have reviewed the complete access logs, audio recordings, simulation overlays, and, in particular, the recovered data provided via personal USB by Lieutenant Dylan Morgan." I nodded without interrupting. "Based on the presented findings," he continued, "this council concludes that you not only did not violate national security protocols, you are the sole party responsible for identifying and stopping the breach of classified strategic data related to the Phantom Veil program." For a brief second, it felt like the air itself paused. "We hereby clear all accusations against you. Your access rights, rank, and formal Pentagon record are fully reinstated and recognized." I heard the rustle of papers, the sharp stamp of a red seal like a final drumbeat closing an old war. No applause. None was needed. I didn't need applause. Dylan stood first, then bowed his head, a quiet gesture, without theatrics. I returned his gaze with gratitude. My brother, the one who had carried the final piece, was now also the one to witness my return to the name they had once erased from every file. Tobias was brought into a separate room at the end of the session. His face was cold, no smirk, no defense, just the silent surrender of a man whose mask had finally cracked. "We'll be opening a full investigation into all of his foreign defense transactions," Linda told me later, as we walked down the hall. "But either way, he's finished." I looked upward. Morning light poured through the glass corridor, catching the insignia on my shoulder. My reflection stared back at me through the glass wall, sharp, defined, no longer blurred like the ghost I once became. 1 week later, I received a formal invitation from the Secretary of Defense's office. I was to be the keynote speaker at the Expanded Defense Conference at Fort Walker, the first event to publicly share portions of Phantom Veil's strategy and architecture for training future officers. It took me a day to decide. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew to stand up and tell a portion of the truth meant I would have to relive everything I once buried, and I no longer had the right to hide. The day of the conference, the main hall at Fort Walker lit up at 7 a.m. Nearly 300 people were present: generals, cadet officers, technical experts, government representatives, and a handful of carefully selected reporters. On stage, I stood, behind a mahogany podium. Behind me, a large screen displayed a single line of text: Courage in the Shadows, Phantom Veil and the Untold. I didn't begin with my rank. I didn't begin with thanks. I simply said, "My name is Everly Morgan. For 18 years, no record carried my name, but I am still here. Because what I protected doesn't need to be written down to exist." I spoke of the birth of Phantom Veil not with dry, technical jargon, but with images. A reactive system written in rooms so cold my hands trembled, in bases without flags, under the white nights of the Arctic, beside people who only knew each other by code names. I spoke of Tobias not as a traitor, but as a reminder of the line between intellect and ambition, between ideals and control. I spoke of the first mistake I ever buried the code I should have erased earlier, and the trust I once gave to the wrong place. Then I paused, looking directly at the front row where Dylan sat in full uniform, notebook in hand, eyes fixed on me without wavering. "We are training a new generation of officers," I said. "People who must not only learn how to command war, but also when to refuse it. Phantom Veil is not a celebration of technology. It is a warning. When we let shadows decide in place of people, the next thing we lose is our humanity." The hall was silent. Not silent with indifference, but the kind of silence I had known before, the kind that only rings when the truth is spoken out loud after too many years of being buried. I ended my speech not with a declaration, but with a question. If one day you must choose between being recognized and being true to what you believe, what will you choose? And I left the stage. No applause. But as I passed Dylan, he stood and bowed again as a man grateful for having walked through the shadows with his sister. I smiled, faintly, but sincerely. That final afternoon of the conference, sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, softening the tension from the debates on cyber warfare, unconventional threats, and defense strategies in the age of artificial intelligence. I was invited back on stage to close the program, not as a technical expert, not as the central figure in a scandal that nearly shattered internal trust, but as a survivor in every sense of the word. The usher asked me before we began, "General Morgan, would you like us to prepare a separate podium? We could display memorabilia, medal excerpts, or introductory slides." I smiled and shook my head lightly. "No need. I'm not wearing medals, and I don't plan to project anything." She looked surprised for a moment, then nodded without further questions. When I stepped onto the stage again, every gaze turned toward me. Some were respectful, some doubtful, some questioning. Why would someone once accused of treason, erased from every national security record, now stand here, without glittering insignia, without a summary of achievements, without banners of praise? I stood tall, my voice steady and clear. "I know, perhaps you expected a grander ending. Something like a medal pinned to the chest, or a name etched in a hall of honor. But today, I won't speak of accomplishments. I won't ask to regain trust. Because I never lost it, I only lost the chance to show it." I paused, scanning the hall. A few sat straighter, as if for the first time they truly wanted to hear not a victory, but a truth. I have been in windowless rooms, where decisions were made without anyone knowing the name of the one who bore them. I have written code no one dared to review. I have issued commands with only a glance, in the last seconds when everything could vanish from radar and from history. And I have been consumed by those same rooms, erased from records as if I had never existed. I let my breath move with the weight of memory. But I never thought of myself as a victim, because I chose from the very start that if survival of my comrades, my country, and its core principles required someone willing to be forgotten, then I would be that person. I stepped closer, pulling from my pocket a small, yellowed slip of paper. I have carried these words with me for 20 years, written by a man I once called commander, later unmasked as a traitor. Though he was wrong, the words remain true. I raised the paper and read slowly. "True honor is not in the record, but in choosing what is right, when no one is watching." The hall did not erupt in applause. But no one left, no whispers, only stillness, the kind of stillness rare when nothing more needs to be argued. I nodded and left the stage. No music, no bright lights, just steady steps carrying a sense of wholeness. I had barely left the hall when Dylan caught up. He wore civilian clothes, hair slightly tousled, clearly just leaving his seat to run after me. "Everly?" Dylan called, pausing as if searching for words. "I think you should have this." He pulled a small dark wooden box from his jacket, hand-carved letters etched on the lid. Unit 12. A. D. 2013. I accepted it. My hands trembled slightly, though my heart was calm. I knew what was inside even before opening it. The steel ring bearing the emblem of Arctic Dawn, the symbol of the Special Operations Unit I once commanded. I had thought this ring lost with Tobias. Lost the day we withdrew from that frozen outpost, leaving behind 3 missing men and an unfinished module. I opened the box quietly. The gray steel glinted beneath the overhead light. But what caught my breath wasn't the familiar shine, it was the engraving inside the band. A new line that had never been there before. For the ones who never needed medals to lead. I looked at Dylan. "You had this added?" He nodded. Tobias kept the ring, but he never wore it. I found it in the cabinet when military police sealed his belongings. I thought, if you could keep anything from Arctic Dawn, it should be the right thing. I gripped the ring tightly, not for glory, but because I knew even through betrayal, sacrifice, and erasure, the values I lived for had never vanished. They had only waited to be called back. At the right time. I didn't need my name etched in gold. I only needed the ones who truly understood to know I had been there. And what I left behind were principles. No proof required, no proclamation, just holding true, even when no one stands beside you. I know each of you listening now may feel something different. Some may feel anger, some sorrow, and some may still be unsure what to believe. But if my story touches a place inside you, a wound you've carried, a silence you once endured, or simply the question, would I choose what's right, even when no one is watching? Then perhaps we share something in common. I don't tell this story for sympathy, nor to prove myself right. I tell it because, in this chaotic world, there are principles that, if left unspoken, will fade. And sometimes, what matters most is not applause, but that someone pauses, thinks, and asks themselves, if it were me, what would I choose? What do you think of this journey? Have you ever faced crossroads where you had to trade honor, family, or ideals? Share your thoughts below. I want to listen. We may not know each other, but perhaps your story also deserves to be told. And if you believe true stories like this, calmly spoken yet deeply felt, deserve a place, then follow this channel. There is more yet untold, more shadows inside families that seem ordinary, more truths that only emerge when we listen long enough to see that what matters isn't who was right or wrong, but what we choose to hold on to, when everything else is so easy to lose.